The alien queen fell into my lap, then refused to let go. The emergency hatch blew open, and something hit me so hard I nearly choked on my food. I grabbed the armrests of my pilot seat out of pure reflex, and the next thing I knew, a small body in torn silver robes was lying across my legs, bleeding from a gash above her collarbone, completely unconscious. My tray of reheated noodles was on the floor. My drink was spinning somewhere near the navigation panel, and I was staring down at something that looked almost human, except for the faint silver glow pulsing beneath her skin, like a heartbeat you could see through glass. My name is Owen Garrett, and I run a cargo freighter called the Stubborn Mule. I haul machine parts, food canisters, and occasionally things I am better off not knowing about, between outer lane stations in the Keth Trade Corridor. I am not military, I am not diplomatic. I have no rank, no crew, no significant savings, and no particular reason to be involved in anything that matters. I was waiting on a delayed shipping manifest above a planet called Oreth 4, killing time, eating bad noodles. And now I had an unconscious alien woman in my lap. I did the only thing that made sense. I checked her pulse. It was there, fast and strange. Double beat where mine would be single. She was breathing. Her lips were the color of cooled ash, and her fingers were clenched tight around a piece of torn harness from an emergency escape pod. Someone had launched her in that pod, hard and fast, from something that had exploded, and the trajectory had sent her straight into my open cargo hatch before the pod depressurized and cracked apart in the upper atmosphere. I carried her to the narrow bunk behind the cockpit and got the medical kit from under the panel. I cleaned the wound at her collarbone. I wrapped it. I checked for broken bones the way the basic training video had taught me 4 years ago when I got my freight license. Nothing shattered. Cracked ribs, probably. A head injury, definitely. I put a heat sheet over her because my ship runs cold, and I have never bothered fixing the heating system because it only affects me, and I just wear 2 jackets. Then I went back to the cockpit and ran her biosignature through the Galactic Registry. The display froze. I restarted it. It came back with a single line that took up the entire screen, and then an overflow warning because the data attached to her name was longer than the registry was designed to display for a single individual. Saraleth Vo Khan, Queen Regnant, Vathi Dominion, Tier 1 Diplomatic Classification, Population under Jurisdiction, 12 billion, Fleet Strength, 4,000 warships, Political Weight, Maximum. I sat there for a moment. I had given her a heat sheet from the cargo locker, the one with the small burn mark on the corner. I had put her on my bunk, which smells like engine oil and instant noodles. The most powerful ruler in this entire quadrant was lying 6 feet behind me, under a slightly damaged blanket. I pressed my palms flat on the console and took a breath. Then my long-range sensors started screaming. 3 warships, closing fast. Vathi design, but wrong markings. These were not her ships. I knew enough about the Dominion to recognize that the Royal Crest and the Syndicate Crest are very different, and these 3 ships were flying the Syndicate colors, which meant they were the people who had just blown up her ship and launched her toward a backwater planet in a cracked escape pod. They were sweeping the debris field, looking for a body or a survivor, looking for her. I had about 4 minutes before their scan pattern reached my position. The smart move was to do nothing. Power down, drift in the debris, let them scan me, and confirm I was just a freight runner with a cargo hold full of machine parts. They would leave. The Queen would either wake up or she would not, and either way it would not be my problem, because I could say I found her unconscious and did not know who she was, which was technically true for the first 5 minutes. I looked at the sensor screen. I looked at the bunk where she was breathing carefully and slowly under my burn-marked heat sheet. I thought about the way her fingers had been clenched around that escape pod harness, the way someone holds something when they are falling, and they know they are falling, and they are trying to hold on anyway. I ran a debris scatter evasion pattern that put 3 large chunks of her destroyed ship between me and the Syndicate scanners, dropped my power output to the minimum I needed to sustain life support, and went very, very quiet. It was the longest 40 minutes of my life. They swept the field twice. One of their ships passed close enough that I could see its running lights through my side viewport, cold and white against the dark. I did not breathe too loud. I am not sure why, because sound does not travel in space, but it felt like the right instinct. Eventually they moved on. They had found nothing alive. As far as the Veth Syndicate was concerned, the Queen was dead, and the coup could proceed. She woke up about 2 hours later. I heard her before I saw her, a sharp intake of breath, and then a low sound that the translator in my earpiece worked very hard on before deciding the closest human equivalent was something between a question and a command. I went back to the bunk, and she was sitting up, rigid, her silver eyes scanning the room with the focused intensity of someone who had been trained from childhood to assess a threat environment in under 3 seconds. Her gaze landed on me. I said, "You are on a cargo freighter. My name is Owen. You bled on my navigation console. Are you in pain?" She stared at me. I said, "I have something hot to drink. I was going to call it tea, but it is not really tea. It is a powder you mix with water. I think it tastes fine. Do you want some?" The translator had a lot of trouble with the word tea. The closest equivalent it found was a Vathi ceremonial liquid consumed only at coronations. This was not that. But she looked at me for a long moment and then said, very precisely, in the formal high register of the Vathi language which my earpiece translated with some effort, "Who are you working for?" "Nobody," I said. "I work for myself. I haul cargo." "Why am I alive?" "Because I know how to wrap a wound," I said, "and because the people looking for you went the other way." She processed this. I could see it happening, the calculation behind her eyes, the weighing of possibilities. She was deciding what I was. She was trying to fit me into a category, and nothing was fitting. "You know who I am," she said. It was not a question. "I ran your biosignature," I said. "Yes. And you want nothing." "I want to get you somewhere safe," I said, "because I would like to sleep tonight, and I cannot sleep if there is a person on my ship who might die, so that is somewhat selfish. But mostly, I just did not want you to die in my cargo hold." She was quiet for a long time. I brought her the hot powder drink. She looked at it the way you look at something that has been handed to you by someone who clearly means well but lives in a very different world than you do. She took it. She held it with both hands, and the warmth seemed to do something to the set of her shoulders. They dropped, just slightly, just barely. She told me about the syndicate, about the coup, about the 3 council members she had already lost, about the assassination attempt that had destroyed her ship and killed 31 members of her crew, whose names she said quietly, one by one, from memory, without stopping. She told me her loyal fleet admiral, a woman named Orana, was docked at Vorath Station with 3 cruisers and a fragment of the Royal Guard, waiting for a signal that had never come. Vorath was 36 hours away at safe speed. I told her I could do it in 30 if I pushed the drive and stopped being invisible about it. She said, "If we move at speed, they will find us." I said, "Probably, but you have 44 hours before your succession law hands the dominion to the people who just killed your crew. So we move." She looked at me in a way that I could not fully read. Then she nodded, once, with the kind of precision that made me understand that a nod from her meant something very different from a casual nod. It was a decision, a real one. I set the course and pushed the drive. We talked for 30 hours. It started with practical things, navigation windows and fuel margins, and what the syndicate ships were likely to carry in terms of weapons. But somewhere around hour 6, when we were deep in the corridor and the stars were long white lines through the viewport, it became something else. She asked me about Earth. I told her about a planet where the weather could kill you and the wildlife could kill you, and historically, humans had killed each other constantly, and we came out of all of it somehow more attached to things, not less. We made food for each other when we were sad. We put blankets on people who were cold. We held on. She said the Vathi believed that attachment was a weakness, that a ruler who grieved was a ruler who made errors, that emotion was something managed privately, behind closed doors, never displayed, never offered to another person. I said, "That sounds incredibly lonely." She did not answer for a while. Then she said, "It is functional." I said, "Those are not the same thing." She turned and looked at the stars. I could see her bioluminescence reflected in the viewport, that soft silver glow that pulsed under her skin, and it was doing something different than it had been before. It was warmer, more gold than silver. I had no idea what that meant for a Vathi, but it seemed important. Around hour 14, she fell asleep in the co-pilot seat. I did not wake her. I flew the ship manually and ate the last of my protein bars, and watched the drive numbers, and let her sleep. Around hour 20, the syndicate found us. Two interceptors, fast and purpose-built for pursuit, came out of a fold point at our 11 o'clock and were on an intercept heading within 90 seconds. They were not firing. They wanted her alive for the confirmation scan, or they wanted a confirmed kill on record. Either way, they needed to get closer first. She was awake immediately, fully alert, no transition between sleep and readiness. She looked at the sensor screen. She looked at me. She said, "Options." I said, "Running will not work. They are faster." So we stopped running. I cut the main drive, spun the stubborn mule on her axis, and fired the cargo release bolts on the 3 rearmost container bays. 6 large freight containers, full of machine parts, went tumbling backward at the interceptors at the speed we had been traveling, which was considerable. It was not a weapon, it was debris, but debris at that speed, in the path of a ship moving to intercept, required a response. The lead interceptor broke hard to port, and its engine housing clipped the edge of a container. Not catastrophic, but enough. Their drive stuttered. Their approach vector collapsed. I opened a broadcast channel on every frequency I could reach, and I talked fast. I said I was Owen Garrett, registry number MU7741, operating the freighter Stubborn Mule, in the Keth Trade Corridor under legitimate freight license. I said I was carrying a passenger whose political status placed her under diplomatic protection. I said that any hostile action against my vessel would be logged, transmitted, and forwarded to every neutral station in the corridor, and that humans had a long memory for people who fired on unarmed freight runners in open space. It was a bluff, mostly. But the galaxy had a complicated relationship with humans. We were not the biggest power out there. We were not the most organized or the most heavily armed. But the last 3 factions that had decided we were safe to ignore had all ended up dealing with consequences nobody had predicted, and that reputation traveled. The syndicate captain on the other end of that channel could not know exactly what would happen if he fired on a human-registered vessel, and uncertainty, in that moment, was enough. He hesitated. I burned the drive at maximum and ran. We came into Vorath Station with the port thruster making a sound that no thruster should ever make, and a hull stress fracture along the forward section that would cost me 3 months of income to repair. I brought the Stubborn Mule in manually at a speed that the docking system flagged as dangerous, and that I will describe generously as ambitious, but we came in whole. Fleet Commander Orana was on the dock with her guard, and 2 of the 3 cruisers visible through the station viewport, running lights on, weapons hot, waiting. When the airlock opened and Saraleth walked out, there was a sound from the assembled Vathi that I had never heard before, and the translator could not fully handle, something between relief and reverence. The coup collapsed over the next 18 hours. With the Queen confirmed alive and Orana's fleet repositioned, the Syndicate's legal window closed. The lords who had backed it began surrendering or defecting before the day was out. Political machinery is like that. It needs momentum to keep moving, and the momentum had broken the moment she walked off my ship. I watched from the airlock, eating the corner of a crushed protein bar I found in my jacket pocket, covered in engine grease and insulation dust. I figured it was finished. She would go back to being a queen. I would get my thruster fixed. Somewhere in a month or 2, I would tell this story to someone, and they would not believe me. I started to go back inside. She came back through the crowd. Her advisors moved with her, then stopped when they realized she was not heading for the command table or the diplomatic hall. She walked straight back to the Stubborn Mule, back to me. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at me for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then she reached out and placed both her hands over mine. I learned later what that means for the Vathi. It is not a casual gesture. It is not a thank you. It is something done in public only when you mean it fully and permanently. A declaration that says you are within my sphere of protection now. You belong to my web. I am responsible for you, and you may be responsible for me. I did not know any of that at the time. I thought she was saying thank you in a formal way, and I said, "You do not need to thank me. I hope your next ship has a better heating system." She did not let go of my hands. She said, "I will require your continued presence while the political situation is resolved." I said, "How long does that take?" A pause. The bioluminescence under her skin went gold again, warm and slow, the way it had looked when she was watching the stars. She said, "Indefinitely." I looked at her. I looked at the advisors behind her who were all clearly experiencing some kind of collective administrative panic. I looked at the stubborn mule, which was leaking coolant gently onto the dock and would need a full week of repairs. I said, "I am going to need a place to park my ship." She arranged it that same afternoon. 3 weeks later, the Veth Syndicate was fully dismantled. Saraleth was back on the throne, with her council restructured, and 3 new legal protections in place that made another coup attempt significantly more complicated. Every political commentator in the quadrant was debating what the human freighter captain's role in the Dominion actually was, and what it signified for relations between humanity and the Vathi, and whether the Queen had lost her sense of proportion, or found something she had never had before. She had commissioned a study on the cultural significance of blankets in human society. I found this out from one of her junior advisors, who seemed embarrassed to be delivering the information. She had also created a formal position in the Dominion Court with a title that translated approximately to Witness of the Queen, a role that had no historical precedent and that the senior council was still drafting procedural guidelines for. I had a docking berth at the Royal Station. I had fixed the thruster. I had learned 14 words of High Vathi, none of them diplomatic. She came to the ship every few days. She brought her documents and her decisions and the weight of 12 billion lives, and she sat in the co-pilot seat, and sometimes we talked, and sometimes we did not. She told me about a law she was changing. I told her about a cargo run I had taken years ago, where half the containers turned out to contain very confused goats. She did not entirely understand the goat story, but the bioluminescence went gold anyway. I made the hot powder drink, the one that was not really tea, and she held it with both hands the way she had the first time. One evening, drifting above Vorath with the running lights off and the stars very clear through the viewport, she said to me, "You acted without calculating the return." I said, "Yes." She said, "Every advisor I have trained acts only when the outcome is favorable. Every treaty I have signed required 10 meetings before the first signature. You pulled me out of a debris field and covered me with a blanket and risked your ship because you did not want me to die. You did not know me. There was no benefit." I thought about it. I said, "It did not feel like a calculation. It just felt like the thing to do." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, as if she was trying out a concept that her language did not have a word for, "I think that might be the most dangerous thing about humans." I said, "Which part?" She said, "That you care before you count." The stars drifted past the viewport. Somewhere below us, the Dominion was running, 12 billion lives going about their days, under a government that was still figuring out what it meant to have a human in the co-pilot seat. I finished my drink. She finished hers. She did not leave until late that night, and when she did, the dock lights caught her silver robes and the glow under her skin, and she looked back once from the airlock, and I raised a hand, and she inclined her head with that precise, deliberate nod that I now knew meant something real. I went back to the cockpit and started a new cargo manifest, just to have something to do, but I was smiling. She came back the next morning. She always came back.